Hello and welcome back to our channel. Today we will be talking about the do's and don'ts of social media during a divorce. Okay, we're going to share four do's and four don'ts that we hope will help you stay away from a whole bunch of trouble that we generally see happening when people get separated and particularly when they're in the litigation process. So I'm going to start off with number one, pause or limit your posting. Okay. And I know that sounds hypocritical because you're probably watching this on some social media of some sort, and we're telling you to pause that. But that's really because we want you to take a moment to reflect and just get yourself together. The healing is obviously a journey, but we find that in the early stages of a separation, emotions are high, and if you're on social media and you're posting and things like that, the your posts would look different from when things are a little bit more settled. So honestly, if you can even avoid social media, that's great, but for most of us that's impossible. So at the very least, just consider pausing or limiting posting, and you could give yourself time. You could say for the next week or the next month or whatever. We just want you to be intentional. So that's step one. Sheree?
Yeah, so step two, change your passwords. And you want to make sure this is the case in case you guys are used to having passwords and they're shared or whatever the situation is. So you want to make sure your accounts are secure. We've had situations in the past where another spouse where partners had access to their social media, would go there and honestly try to say some ridiculous things or try to advance their position by making the person look bad as if they're talking about them on social media and manipulate the evidence, and it just doesn't look good. So just make sure that this applies for all of your social media accounts and your banking information too, although we're not here to talk about that today. But definitely make sure that all of your accounts are secure. So change the passwords and make sure that like they don't have access. Make it as also something that's more secure, something that's not easily guessable by your partner or your significant other.
Makes a lot of sense, and kind of tied into that, this third tip is tied to the password as well. It's just adjusting your settings. So when you're if you don't want the other person to see your messages, just think about adjusting your settings. So besides just changing your password, and in some cases it may mean that you have to block the other party, or their family, friends that follow you. So just again, be intentional. Think about who is, going to be seeing that message. And if it's not the person that you want, in this case, specifically your ex, then consider like adjusting your privacy settings. Okay.
Yeah, and I just want one thing to note to that, especially if you're in an abusive relationship, a lot of the times that like people, the other spouse would take, notes on where you are, what you're posting, and it becomes a more emotionally turmoil situation, and you just want to obviously make sure that you're secure, you're safe, and so making sure that the other party doesn't have access to your very private, whereabouts and things like that. So it just would be good to put your mind to that early on.
Fantastic. That's a very great tip. So,
Yeah. And another tip is think before you post. I don't know how often we can say this. And unfortunately, it happens to be something it's thought about after you post, not before. But always ask
yeah.
yourself, before you post, consider who's going to see it, how it's going to be perceived if it's ever used in a litigation or in a context like that. So you definitely want to be very, very critical about what you're posting. You might, from your perspective, deem it to be appropriate. I always say, ask a friend. And if you ask a friend, maybe you shouldn't be posting that.
True. No, and people say, so even to put context into this, right? If you're in a parenting battle, for example, and the other side is saying, well, we want to limit the amount of time, the kids spend with you because you're XYZ, or maybe you hold radical views or whatever, and you're out there on social media posting extreme, views on whatever it may be, religion, politics, vaccines, even that was a huge one at the time, right? So you come off in, it's your opinion, you have a right to, you mean your freedom of speech is a charter protected right, so there's no doubt about that. But if it can be used in a way that manipulated and used to portray you in a certain light, then you really want to consider is your what trumps here, right? The ability to parent your children in this specific example versus exercising your chatter rights. And I know that in this, sometimes it doesn't sound fair, and people feel like, well, it's just what I posted on social media. Or some people even have a different persona on their social media than it's actually their true selves on a day to day. But again, be careful when you're going through a separation. You have to look out for what's in your family's best interest first and foremost, and in your best interest. And we think that just being very careful about what you post is crucial.
Exactly.
Okay, don't.
Now on to the don't. So do not post negative comments. I cannot say this often enough, and you would be surprised by how many people would see this and then use that same information to get an, I wouldn't say an unfair advantage, because these are comments that you are saying. And if there are, yeah, if they are, and with respect to if you're going to through a parenting situation in a court battle, it's not going to reflect well on you. I've had situations where there's an immediate perception of someone who posts such vile comments about their partner, about how they're going to be able to co-parent. So as much as you might not think that it will reflect negatively or terribly on you, you would be wrong. This comes often, especially when you're trying to decide who makes decisions for the children. If you are speaking incredibly negative about a party publicly, the court is only going to wonder how you speak to that person privately when you're dealing with your parenting disputes. So it is not something small. It's not something lighthearted. You definitely want to be very careful. And honestly, I would just say do not hash it out in any post,
Yeah.
social media, personally, whatever the case is. Do not do it.
Yeah, and just so people don't get the impression that it's only parenting disputes here, because we've used two examples now that involve parenting. I'll give you an example about support, like going on a rant about how I'm never going to pay this person support and they're never going to get a dime out of me and things like that. Well, let's say the next week you actually lose your job. And now, we're trying to present to a judge that, well, you can't pay support because you lost your job. Well, the other party is going to use your post to try to prove to a judge that you're intentionally underemployed. And if that's a strategy and you are intentionally underemployed, well, that's a different question. But I have seen this happen where it wasn't intentional. The person did actually lose their job, but they have various posts where they've spoken negatively about having to pay support to the other party. And of course, again, the judge doesn't know you, right? So what are they going to think? Well, you've been ranting about why you're not going to pay support to this person and whatnot, and all of a sudden you've lost your job. They're not going to think it's a coincidence. So again, just be careful about such things.
Yeah, that's a good one. I never even
Yeah.
that.
Okay. So another don't is sharing personal details. And that's again ties into most times when people are making negative comments, they're sharing to this an element of personal details that are involved. But even aside from, I'm going to give an example that's aside from a negative comment. So I was involved in a case where our client went and reposted a very personal picture from several decades ago when the parties got married. It's a detail. I mean, this is an extreme example, but it worked negatively against our client because it looked like, and a very it was a private, I don't know if to say it was a private picture because it was something that was shared already in the past, but it was looked at badly by the judge. So just be very careful. And that's because at this point there was an element of abuse in the marriage. And so that was perceived that way, that this personal detail of the person being at the beach or whatever, how many years ago, was somehow now construed as an abusive behavior. And obviously, for confidentiality reasons, I'm trying to leave out as much detail as possible. But you just have to remember that going and reposting and things like that. This is a post the person had before taking that post from their social media and now sharing on your social media and things like that. It could backfire. So please be careful.
And your intentions might be good. Like, for example, you're saying like happy anniversary, or like, this would have been like our 6th year together. Like that could be perceived as harassing. Yes. So you also want to be very careful, because if you're having difficulty accepting the relationship is over, that is an entirely separate thing. But don't take that to social media. It could be construed as negative, abusive, or harassing
Yeah,
behavior. So just be mindful.
absolutely. What's another don't?
Another don't is do not engage in arguments.
Yeah.
Please refrain from, engaging. Like so often I see like I would call it Twitter war or whatever it is, like a Facebook war
Facebook wars.
between, yeah,
Yeah.
between either, the partners or close family and friends.
Mhm.
Engaging in something that is incredibly private, should not be public. And you just don't want to engage in an argument, especially on social media, even if those
Even if
messages
you
are
win,
private.
though, even if
Yeah,
you win, it doesn't matter. Like if
yeah.
you're in
There's
a,
no winner there.
there's no win. Like if you're in a litigation process, well, it doesn't matter that you won the war on social media. And if
Mhm.
you're in a mediation setting or a collaborative family law setting, then you're only preventing a negotiated settlement from happening. Like, why are you winning the social media war? Like, really?
Yeah. I wouldn't. And then honestly, like a lot of the times people think like, oh, well, if I'm not sharing the exact name or details, like in terms of like, if I'm a little more vague with what I'm saying, I'm not gonna get in trouble. Trust me, like you will. Or you could, at
No,
the
and,
end of
and,
the
and
day.
sometimes even the vagueness could be misconstrued. Like
Yeah.
it looks like you're being vague, but a judge could look and read between the lines and are actually reading in things that weren't even your intention. Like that's the point of it. So honestly, if you can just avoid posting about the other person, about the process, about any
But
of
your
that.
feelings in this way, and I understand it's a place where people share a lot, and I don't know, I'm not a very socially active person, but some people very much are, and it's kind of like a limited expression on freedom, but at the same time you also want to be very careful how that's construed in third party hands. So yeah.
Yeah. And another thing we didn't mention as well, or well, I guess this would be the last kind of don't is don't just post about your children if you have them indiscriminately, right? So make sure this is something it's major. Some parents have differing views about it, so don't just assume. Make sure that it's okay. And if the other, because there's times where courts have upheld that children should not be posted, like pictures of children should not be posted and things like that. So it's a conversation worth having.
So yeah, so don't assume privacy at the end of the day. And also like that goes towards, if you're sharing, information, that don't just assume that your children who are on these apps, if they're eligible and old enough, that are not going to see them. There are ways that, content can get shared around easily. So just because you put yourself on private, don't assume that it will become public and available to somebody who doesn't really want to see that and is not appropriate for them to see.
Absolutely. Okay. So hopefully we've given you some tips, but if there is one major overarching theme here is just be careful what you post on social media, be intentional. Don't just go on, we know you're mad and you could be upset or even just justifiably want to put the other person down. We understand all of those emotions, but when you're going through a divorce, we just want you to just take a step back, be calm, be intentional about what you post or don't post, recognizing that it could have a negative effect on the outcome of the process. So until next time, we'll sign out for now. Bye.